Good afternoon. Welcome to the Labor Forum here on WRFG 89.3 FM in Atlanta. My name is Diane Mathowitz. I'm a retired auto worker, member of UAW Local 10, co-host of the program, and seated next to me here in the studio is Paul McLennan. He's a retired MARTA worker with ATU 732. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Diane.
We're always happy to be on a Monday here at WRFG. Many other people may not be happy about Mondays rolling around, but we really enjoy doing this program. We hope that we are going to bring you some information today that will prove to be valuable and informative. The opinions that are expressed on this program may not necessarily be those of the Board of Directors, staff, or volunteers of WRFG, but we do think that we bring the voices of working class people, the issues, and their solutions to those problems here to this program, and that makes us pretty unique among all the various kinds of media that exists. Most of it is for the benefit of corporations, and it's always their views, their solutions to what the problems they've caused us. So we're going to start our program today with our labor headlines and then go to labor history. And then we have two guests in the studio, one at 4:15 and another at 4:30. Please do stay tuned to hear what they have to say about what's going on with important issues here in Atlanta. So here are the labor headlines for Monday, February 22nd, 2016. The Labor Forum has reported in the past on powerful job actions taken by the Brazilian Auto Workers Union against threatened plant closings and layoffs, especially at U.S.-owned facilities. But this story is about international solidarity. On Thursday, February 18th, representatives of several Brazilian unions and labor confederations, led by the Auto Workers Union, were joined by leaders of Industrial, which is a global union, the National Union of Athletes, and the UAW. They delivered a letter to the president of the organizing committee for the Rio 2016 Olympic and Paralympic Games, denouncing the sponsorship of Nissan for the events. Nissan is the only car sponsor and is providing 6,500 vehicles for the games. The worker organizations charge that Nissan's anti-union policies at the Canton, Mississippi plant violate Olympic standards, which include freedom of association rights for workers employed by the game's suppliers. Although Nissan has unionized plants, including in Brazil, the Canton plant management is openly hostile to union representation, going so far as to include anti-union statements in its employee handbook. Canton, Mississippi Nissan workers were part of the delegation and noted that in December 2015, the National Labor Relations Board ruled that the company had violated federal law by threatening to terminate workers for union activities and had stated the plant would close if workers voted for a union. Furthermore, when hundreds of workers began wearing pro-union t-shirts, the NLRB determined that the newly instituted company dress policy was illegal. The letter calls on the Olympic Committee to uphold the Games standards and insist Nissan take corrective action in Canton, Mississippi in order to maintain its sponsorship. Here in national news, I'm bringing you some information about two labor and community mobilizations not covered much, if at all, in the big business media. Again, on Thursday, February 18th, in response to two pieces of anti-immigrant legislation before the Wisconsin legislature, some 50,000 people massed at the Capitol in Madison. From the pictures, you can see that every floor of the building was filled with opponents of these bills that would increase racial profiling and police repression. Called A Day Without Latinos and Immigrants, hundreds of businesses and agriculture and dairy operations closed, and many more barely functioned as workers took the day off across the state. Thousands of students walked out of class. People did not shop. The next day, word came from the office of the Senate Majority Leader that the bill authorizing local police to investigate people's immigration status and detain them for deportation would not be scheduled for a vote. While organizers are somewhat leery and cautious about this, they continue to pressure the legislature and the governor to end the attacks on working people and their families. On that very same day, Thursday, the 18th, members of CTUL, that is the Centro de Trabajadores Unidos and Lucha, in other words, the Center for United Workers in Struggle, who clean big box retail stores such as Macy's and Home Depot in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, began their 7th strike in 3 years to protest the low pay, backbreaking conditions, and rampant wage theft by the cleaning contractors. The day before, unionized janitors with SEIU Local 26 began an unfair labor practices strike against their employers, mostly large bank and business office towers. And just days earlier, CTUL janitors employed by Capitol Building Services Group, the cleaning contractor for Macy's and Herberger department stores, won $425,000 in unpaid wages in a lawsuit. Following pre-dawn picket lines, janitors from SEIU Local 26 and CTUL joined a march called by Minnesotans for a Fair Economy, a labor, faith, and community social justice coalition. Several downtown intersections were blocked during the morning rush hour, causing massive traffic jams and disrupting business as usual for the wealthy corporations that exploit these workers. Again, if you go online, you will see these pictures of what took place in downtown Minneapolis. Lastly, the Southern Workers Assembly, a rank-and-file network of workers and unions, organizing committees, worker centers, and other worker organizations, has instituted an 8-session Southern Workers School to be held over a 3-month period with 2 in-person sessions and 6 by computer connection. The school's intention is to study the history and conditions facing the working class, to learn from the successes and setbacks, and to develop strategies for social movement unionism in the region. The opening session is March 4th to the 6th in Raleigh, North Carolina. Over 70 worker activists will be attending from 8 states and more than 20 locals and other organizations. A delegation from the victorious Boston School Bus Drivers Union, who won a 2-year battle against union-busting Veolia Transdev that included a lockout, the firing of the union leadership, phony felony charges, as well as daily disregard for the contract resulting in hundreds of grievances, will be there to describe their fight-back strategy of community labor solidarity. Although registration is now closed, the printed materials will be made available at the Southern Workers Assembly website. And that is www.southernworker.org. So it's a singular, www.southernworker.org. The Labor Forum will also be interviewing attendees in the weeks following the opening session. That concludes our labor headlines for today. We'll move quickly to Paul with This Week in Labor History.
Thanks, Diane. On February 23, 1864, a 19-year-old Irish immigrant, Kate Mullaney, led members of the Collar Laundry Union, the first all-female union in the United States, in a successful strike in Troy, New York. The strike was for increased wages and improved working conditions. Women working in commercial laundries spent 12 to 14 hours a day ironing and washing detachable collars with harsh chemicals and boiling water, and were paid about $3 to $4 a week. Women workers had been organizing unions since the 1840s in places like Lowell, Massachusetts, but the Collar Laundry Union was one of the first women's unions that lasted longer than the resolution of a specific issue. Kate Mullaney's family emigrated from Ireland in 1850, and they moved to Troy in 1853. A year later, Kate's father died, and her mother became sick, leaving Kate as the eldest child to be the family's sole provider. She got a job in a collar laundry, the highest paying of the garment industry jobs, but also the hardest. By 1864, the detachable shirt, collar, and cuffs were making Troy, New York, one of the wealthiest cities in the country. The wealth of the rich came at the expense of women who worked in incredibly hot, humid conditions, working with boiling water, caustic bleaches and starches, and red-hot irons. They washed, bleached, starched, and ironed millions of collars, enduring back pain, aching feet, burned limbs, and scalding and chemical burns. Almost all of the women who worked in Troy's factories, laundries, and mills were Irish. They had come to America during the Great Migration of the Irish during the potato famine and made their way upstate from New York City and Boston because there was plenty of work in Troy and the surrounding mill towns. By the 1860s, Troy supplied most of the country's detachable collars and cuffs, employing over 3,700 women launderers, starchers, and ironers. When owners introduced new starching machines that increased production but were scalding hot to handle, Kate Mullaney and her co-worker Esther Keegan organized 300 women into the Collar Laundry Union. Shortly after forming the union, at noon on Wednesday, February 23, 1864, 300 women went on strike against Troy's 14 commercial laundry establishments. That afternoon, Kate met with the women to discuss their demands for a 25% wage increase and their safety concerns. The well-organized union held strong, and the laundry owners gave in a week after the strike began. Kate and her fellow union officers demonstrated their leadership and good business sense by maintaining higher wages for their members than most working women earned in the area. They also accumulated a larger treasury than those of many men's locals and were able to offer benefits to their members even during illness and family death, something unheard of before the existence of the union. The Collar Laundry Union found itself in the position of leadership and mentorship to other women's unions, even to the point of paying their expenses while the women could educate their own members and train leadership. Once Kate Mullaney was confronted by a journalist who told her there weren't enough women in New York to be labor organizers. Kate replied confidently, "You show me the women and I'll turn them into organizers." In 1868, she was named Assistant Secretary of the National Labor Union, making her the first female to hold a national labor position. Later, she led efforts to form a laundry cooperative as well as a cooperative to manufacture collars and cuffs in order to shift ownership and control to the workers. She co-authored the Working Women's State Labor Union of New York's resolution in support of cooperatives. The women believed that cooperatives were the true way in which the wealth of the country can be more evenly distributed and that the laboring classes may enjoy the full profits of their labor. Due to economic conditions and great pressure from the factory owners, these efforts to build cooperatives failed, but Mullaney continued her work to improve the economic lives of countless working-class women. She also recognized the connection between the struggle for economic and political rights for women, while during this same time middle-class women's suffragists were focused solely on political rights. Kate Mullaney died in 1906. As a labor leader and organizer, she is one of this country's most important figures in the history of the labor movement.
Oh, thanks, Paul, very much. We're going to take a little short break, and then we're going to have our first guest on the air. Allie McCullen has been on the program before. She's a member of RiseUp, and she's one of the education advocates and activists who are involved in talking about this Atlanta Public Schools plan. They're calling it a turnaround plan. We'll talk about what it's really going to turn around. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Please stay tuned to the WRFG. All our programs here on the station are worth your time, the music programs and of course the public affairs programs which the Labor Forum is part of. I want to make sure everyone is aware that there's so many ways you can connect to the Labor Forum. We have a website, WRFGlaborforum.org. We have a Facebook page, we have Twitter, and of course we also have our own YouTube channel. For those of you that are on the YouTube channel right now, you see Allie sitting between Paul and I, and Jason in the back waiting to come on next. And you always can go to the YouTube channel to hear and see archival copies of all the programs at the Labor Forum. So enough advertising about ourselves, promotion. I'll let you know how to get a hold of the Labor Forum. Welcome, Allie. This is I know you were here in the past, and education seems to be one of the things that you really focus on. And so I think a lot of listeners have no doubt seen something either on television or in the newspaper about this plan that the superintendent of the Atlanta Public Schools, I think, sort of dropped really fast just several weeks ago, and a plan to essentially close, merge several schools and to turn a number of them over to charter management companies or charter management entities. So you're with RiseUp, and RiseUp has held a number of educational events and demonstrations and protests and gone to meetings. So if you wouldn't mind outlining for our listeners just what this so-called turnaround plan is, and then we're going to really talk about what some of the issues facing education are and whether this turnaround plan does anything what it promises to do. Okay?
Right. Thanks for having me. So the superintendent announced at the last Board of Education meeting on February 1st a plan to close Bethune Elementary, merge 4 other schools into 2, and then to turn 5 Carver cluster schools over to private operators, so private charter operators. And for folks that don't know already, it's Thomasville Heights Elementary, Slater Elementary, Price Middle School, Carver High School would, under this plan, be operated by purpose-built schools. So these are the folks that started Drew Charter School, but more importantly, is part of a larger project that's started by Tom Cousins, a major real estate developer in Atlanta, and then additionally Gideon's Elementary would be operated by Condesi Schools. And then there are other elements of the turnaround plan that are less troublesome, more tutoring, more professional development for educators. But the major changes were just announced and are set to be voted on March 7th, which we feel doesn't give parents and stakeholders in these schools enough time to properly vet these charter operators, to decide if this is something that reflects their needs and values. And yeah, it's just not enough time.
Now, wait a minute. Now, my understanding is in this plan, all the current teachers essentially have to reapply for their jobs.
That's correct.
And that then they will not be under the Atlanta Public Schools, so that their wages and benefits are all at the mercy of whoever these private companies or management teams or whatever you want to call them are.
Correct.
So this obviously means the loss of wages, benefits, rights at all these schools for the teachers who have been there, some of them for years.
Right, and folks wouldn't be surprised to see that online right now there is a job application for turnaround teachers that includes a signing bonus. I'm sure a lot of these current educators would appreciate that bonus. Would also appreciate not being asked to reapply for their jobs. So we've been working, RiseUp has been working closely with the Atlanta Federation of Teachers as well as the Atlanta Association of Educators, because this is not just about neighborhoods and students, it's a huge labor issue. Atlanta has had a unrelenting attack on educators in the city, especially on Black veteran educators, and we see that continued in this plan.
Okay, so Paul, did you have a question? Because otherwise I'm going to go. All right, we're doing eye contact here. So
Sorry.
it's all right. So Atlanta emerged from a cheating scandal. The cheating scandal was brought on in large part by the incredible pressure for teachers to teach to a test. That the whole idea of a school day was to prepare children for how to put the right circle in the right bubble on a test, and didn't seem to have very much to do with critical thinking or really even learning kind of basics. All right, so this, are the schools that are part of this plan, some of the schools that were impacted in part by these phony results of the tests because of the cheating? Or is this sort of still a separate issue?
It is related. I mean, I think the entire system was implicated at some point in this scandal, right? Or at least that's what the governor would hope us to think. And how I kind of been thinking about it, and a lot of us have been thinking about it, is that the Atlanta cheating scandal was in many ways manufactured to set us up for where we are now. We saw that in New Orleans it really took a hurricane in order for 100 schools to be sucked up into this recovery school district. And in Atlanta, we didn't have a natural disaster, we had a manufactured one, the cheating scandal, and that gave the governor ammunition to push for his opportunity school district, and it's the threat of this opportunity school district that is being used to justify the timeline and this turnaround plan. And all the while, students are still being treated as if they're just test scores. So you would think that Atlanta would have learned its lesson as to what using standardized tests as the sole measure of school performance could do. And yet, that's how this turnaround plan is being pushed, and the opportunity school district is being pushed. It's by test scores.
Could you say a little more about the relationship between, it sounds like really a corrupt relationship between the state and the school board in terms of the person that was hired, that worked for the governor?
Right. For folks that don't already know, Erin Hames was the former education advisor to Governor Deal. She resigned from her role in the governor's office and then immediately incorporated a new private education consulting business called Form Ed, Inc. And within the same week was offered a no-bid consulting contract by APS to essentially consult the Atlanta Public Schools on how to avoid the state takeover, which she helped write. So when she was working with the governor, she helped write the legislation for the state takeover of schools that will be on the ballot in November. Has not passed yet. And then has been offered a contract to advise Atlanta Public Schools on how to avoid that takeover.
By already sending it to into private hands.
Right, and so she's consulting APS, $96,000 no bid contract. She is still consulting the governor, so she's getting paid $30,000 to consult the governor on on ed policy, and we can only imagine it's which schools will and won't be taken over or are at threat to take over, and her office, or she shares office space with the Cousins Foundation, which was one of the foundations which subsidized a study to determine what this turnaround plan would look like, and is part of purpose-built communities, which is being brought in to manage a lot of these schools in the Carver cluster. So it's very incestuous. And
generating apparently a lot of bucks. I just want to ask a question because we only have a couple minutes left, and we've had Verdelia Turner on several times. And the problems in education are real. And that is because the social problems that the students come from are even more real. So that we're talking about children who live below the poverty line, who oftentimes are on subsidized lunch, who may come from single-parent families or come from families where people are on 2 and 3 jobs. Just a whole variety of issues, don't have health care, we could just go on and on. And then come into school bringing with them that, and then teachers are supposed to teach to the test. And so what would be, if RiseUp could design this situation about a turnaround for these schools, what would you all offer? What would you suggest?
Right. One solution that folks are starting to turn to nationally, and this is not just here in Atlanta, and this is not an old remedy. The jargony term for it is community schools, but it's this idea that actual communities should have a stake in the future of their schools, that we need as many local stakeholders and organizations as possible to commit to supporting the school, and then we also need what's called wraparound services, but in reality, we know that students are bringing so much to school with them that, yes, there should be health and social services on school campus, so that if students are dealing with issues at home or need to see a doctor. You're not asking a teacher to try to fill that role. And then these families need support, right? We try to, Dr. Karstarfin calls it we need a child-centered strategy or student-centered strategy, but we act as if students don't have families, they don't live in neighborhoods that are affected by the issues that these students are affected by. So having health and social services on site that families could have access to, and that would give neighborhoods and communities another point of entry into the school. But regardless, communities, parents, teachers, students themselves should be given the tools and resources in order to determine the fate of their schools. I don't think that white real estate tycoons know what's best for the future of these schools.
We are out of time, Allie, so can you just let folks know about this March 7th meeting and what it is that RiseUp would encourage people to do?
Right. As I mentioned, the board hopes to vote on this turnaround plan March 7th, which only gave anybody who wanted to find out more about it a month to ask questions. But we know folks have a lot more questions about what this will look like. We know contracts haven't been written. We are not sure the relationship that these private operators will have ultimately with the district. The superintendent keeps saying that they won't be charter schools, and yet they will be privately managed. And so if they're not officially charter schools, what are they? Will they be conversion charters in the future? But I think people have questions. If you have questions, please contact your board member with those questions. The Atlanta Public Schools website has their contact information for you. And I hope that you will join us at the board meeting. And we will put pressure on the board to give their constituents more time to ask questions and to come up with the solutions that they need, and not the solutions that are being bought.
Thank you very much, Allie. We really appreciate you coming on. We're going to take another message, a little break for another message, and bring on Jason Dozier. And Jason is here. He's a Mechanicsville resident, and again, here on the Labor Forum, we've had lots of conversations about these big developments that sometimes are quite often the only impact on the neighborhoods is a bad one. And so we want to talk about the fight back that's being put up by residents around Turner Field. So please stay tuned and listen carefully to the message you're about to hear. Thanks, Allie.